you want to be healthier, yet you just don't know what to do? All these shows telling you this and that, but nothing seems to work. Well, listen close. Golden State Media Concepts has got something great for you. The Health and Wellness Podcast, dedicated to workout trends, healthy eating habits, diet, and everything about healthy living. Join us in our banters as we help you not just live life to the fullest, but live it to the healthiest.
GSMC Health and Wellness Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Alex. Today, you guys, we're going to talk about broken hearts. Apropos of nothing, we're just going to go ahead and dig into it today because we think of a broken heart as being something that just really makes us sad and hurts us emotionally, but it can have really far-reaching impacts in our health and our wellness. It can affect us spiritually and mentally as well as physically. So you can actually feel very deeply in your body different types of pain associated with having a broken heart. Indeed, I know a lot of folks who have had their hearts broken one too many times and have since given up on pursuing love at all. So it can impact us mentally as well and just really crush people's spirits. So we're going to talk about that today. What is a broken heart? Well, I like to think of it as being heart crushing because you can't break a heart, but you can crush one. So that is the way that I think of it, or heart wrenching. But by any other name, it is still just as painful. So, if you have had a broken heart, which I'm sure a lot of y'all have, then we're really going to think about the hurt feelings for that first, and also talk about the physically painful aspects of it. They've done some studies in psychology and neuroscience and linguistics, and found that at least 14 different languages often conflate terms of hurt feelings as a physically painful experience. So those are very much intertwined throughout a host of different languages. There's a really strong connection between our emotions and a physical sensation. And that is for an excellent reason. A broken heart really is a physical experience just as much as it is an emotional one. They did a study in 2011 and published it in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And they found that showing people who have recently broken up with their partners photos of their exes activated some areas of their brains associated with physical pain. So their partner had broken up with them specifically, and they had then shown them photos of their exes and found that different parts of their brains lit up that were associated with pain. And then other research has also shown how our brain experiences pain in the form of rejection, or as a result of rejection. So when people's feelings get hurt by rejection, then part of your brain mechanisms are those same mechanisms involved in physical pain. So why is that? Well, some scientists hypothesize that our bodies have essentially two systems to deal with pain. One is the physical types of wounds, and the other is negative emotional wounds. So when you get a cut, your blood tells you where the damage was done, and similarly, the bad feelings tell you how to bandage it up. But when it comes to like a breakup, there's no blood involved there. Just a lot of really upsetting emotions that make you want to maintain close relationships in the future, and make you also want to sometimes avoid close relationships in the future, just depending on how you deal with it. we are all very different folks, and we all deal with different types of pain and the same types of pain very differently from each other. So, what do we do here? You are really evolutionarily programmed to have those types of reactions. And that's okay. It's definitely going to hurt, but again, it's a part of that group associations and those group memberships we've discussed before. You have to make sure that you do have those types of reactions, because if you don't, then you would be acting in very bizarre ways in your relationships and you would not fit in with the group. So you would be rejected from group membership, and it would not be very good for you in the evolutionary wild, so to speak. So let's talk about where heartbreak hurts and why in that regard. So if you get a broken heart, you probably wouldn't, go to the ER for that. But in some cases, people need to. They performed a study and published it in the Journal of American Medical Association and found that people are almost twice as likely to suffer a heart attack or stroke in the 30 days after a partner's death. So if you hear those stories about people who are very close to each other dying, and then within a month or so the other person dies, that is statistically more likely to happen, just in general. It's very sad, but it's also kind of beautiful in a way when it comes, to the other person dying first, not the rejection component. But it's specifically for if a partner has died. So essentially you can kind of die of a broken heart. Now, up to 2% of people who are at the hospital for what they think is a heart attack are actually suffering from broken heart syndrome. That is something that they found at Loyola University Health System in Chicago. So the heart muscle really totally changes its shape. People with broken heart syndrome will have shortness of breath and some chest pain. Their EKG readings often look like they would if they were having an actual heart attack. But when they look closer at it, their coronary arteries are all normal. There's absolutely no blockages that are causing anything weird happening in the heart muscle itself. So what is actually happening there? They think that it really is associated with adrenaline and sympathetic nervous system surges. So you can get those during super stressful times, like during a divorce, the death of a partner, or if you get a serious medical diagnosis, or you have super big financial problems suddenly, then it can really just stress you out to the point that you are getting broken heart syndrome. But they don't entirely understand how it works yet. They just know that when they go in to look at people who are having a heart attack, 2% of them at the hospital don't have anything wrong with their arteries. So it's broken heart syndrome at that point. Now, when you experience a heartache, you often also experience it in your mind. That's where we think of it the most. And if you think about your ex as your better half, or just being somebody who is very integral to your life, then that breakup can be super painful. They've performed research at Monmouth University in New Jersey and asked people to describe how their breakup affected them. A lot of folks responded saying that they weren't sure who they were anymore. There's a song that kind of encapsulates that, if you are a lover of sad songs like I am. It's by Missy Higgins called Where I Stood. And in the song she says, "I don't know who I am without you. All I know is that I should. And I don't know if I could stand another hand upon you. All I know is that I should." And she's talking about her partner moving on and how the next person may be able to love them better than she could. And it's kind of a healthy way to look at it in a way, but it's also very sad as the song progresses. But I think it's a really great song for illustrating this concept of not understanding the self anymore when you have broken up with somebody that was an integral part of your life. So relationships that we have with other people are really an important area that helps us in our lives to learn and grow. When you don't have that source of growth anymore, a chunk of your identity can sometimes just feel like it's totally dissipated. But also, the opposite can be true. So if relationships don't actually promote a lot of growth with you, then sometimes the breakup can be positive. Folks emerge from a split with positive emotions and more personal growth if their relationship wasn't providing enough self-expansion. Then you get a benefit when you break up in that way. So you can hurt in your heart and in your mind when you break up with somebody, and that's okay. It's normal. We all go through it. And if you are having a lot of chest pain following a breakup, go see a doctor. You may have broken heart syndrome, or you may actually be having a heart attack. So go and check it out. You are more likely to experience that in the 30 days following a breakup. All right, we're going to go on a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about other areas of the body in which you can feel heartache. Stay tuned.
Are you looking to learn more about the latest trends from the fitness world? Are you confused by all of the different trends that are out there? The GSMC Fitness Podcast is the place for you. The GSMC Fitness Podcast is the place to come for people of all skill and interest levels. Join us as we explore the latest trends in the fitness world. Does that new exercise really work? Should I try yoga? Whatever your question, chances are good you'll find an answer on the GSMC Fitness Podcast.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about heartache and how it's generally experienced in the heart and in the mind, like quite literally in a physical manner. Now we're also going to talk about the stomach. So if you are like me, you carry a lot of your stress in your stomach. So if you are upset, then you might not be hungry at all, or you may feel nauseous. You may even throw up a little bit. You might just feel like you get a lump in your stomach. All that jazz is associated with normal reactions to heartbreak. So not everyone experiences it that way, but sometimes it will kick your body into fight or flight mode. It's going into survival mode, period. And that pit in your stomach that we think of comes from the same place as that similar type of pit in your stomach you get when you're really scared. So it is very much a survival reaction. In both of those situations, your body feels threatened. And like we've discussed before in previous episodes, it can't tell the difference between different types of stress. It doesn't understand if it's really being physically threatened versus just very emotionally overwhelmed. When that happens, your body is preparing to go into fight or flight or fawning or freezing as a response. But it is also sending blood to your muscles and away from your stomach in order to do that. So your digestion stops, and then you start feeling a little bit nauseous, perhaps. But it's really difficult to just get through a heartache. But you can get through it. So just as anything else difficult passes, so will the heartache, and often sooner than folks really anticipate it happening. As one study has been performed on college freshmen in romantic relationships, and this was over a period of 6 months. They periodically asked the students to predict how distressed they'd feel if they broke up with their partners. And then if a breakup actually happened during the process, the participants reported feeling less angst than they had actually expected. So the study is really finding that overall, we tend to overestimate how bad breakups are going to be, how hurtful they're going to really feel. And that tends to lead us into staying in relationships perhaps longer than we should. People's emotions tend to follow more of a positive trajectory than a negative one following a breakup. So folks are really reluctant to sign up for pain And that's unfortunately exactly what doctors recommend. It helps us build up our resilience. And it can be painful in our stomach, in our heads, in our minds, in our hearts. But it is important for us to experience it and to not give up on it completely, even if it does feel like the end of the world. So now that we've gone through the physical aspects of it, we're going to talk a little bit about it from a wellness perspective, especially from like a spiritual perspective. So just like you can try a juice cleanse or other types of detoxes, a lot of folks, think about performing a detox for heartbreak. There is no one way to do that, and it's really difficult because you are stuck in your mind this entire time. It's difficult to not ruminate on it when you're stuck with these feelings of loss, which seem endless in front of us. And instead of really processing our emotions, many of us often bury our pain as deeply as possible. So we bury it in work, we bury it in our friendships and relationships with new people. We will just bury it any way that we can so we don't have to deal with it. But anything that you really suppress is going to have some consequences. Remember, we talked about the shadow and the ego and how the parts of us that we repress go into our shadow. And in order to really be a full, whole person, we need to integrate that shadow with the ego to be a full self. So that can do some damage over time by repressing it, and we need to kind of bring it to the light. A lot of emotional heartaches are very, very upsetting. A lot of folks go to therapy for it, as a matter of fact. And some folks even turn to spiritual healing, like alternative healing and different types of personal exploration. So you can perform meditations if you like. You can do all kinds of different things to help you cope. It's whatever is helping you the best and not hurting other people. So why is it really necessary to work on our emotional space? Well, if you don't ever think about these things that are bothering you because you are spending so much time shoving it away so that you don't have to feel it, and if you're like me, you'd rather think your emotions than feel your emotions, it's not good for you. And then you often also forget about them until they are dredged back up. That's very hard to encounter the second time around. It's not really doing us any favors to not process it the first time. So we need to really release those negative energies that we have been repressing. Because if you're repressing it, you're just shoving it back down into a box, but you still have that box. So think of it that way. It's like the boxes of things you keep under your bed. Some of you may have a shoebox with photos of exes and little mementos and stuff like that. And in some cases, those are happy memories. And in other cases, they're really upsetting ones. And some are good to keep, and others aren't so much. So in this way, we need to go ahead and air those things out. We want to spring clean our emotional spaces so that we aren't just holding on to things for too long. Does it spark joy? No? Okay, go ahead and let's thank it for what it brought into our lives and release it at that point. You can do the KonMari method on your emotional life as well. So we need to be able to bring our emotions out into this open space and air them out, or otherwise they're like musty blankets that are just hanging out in the back of the linen closet because it's our least favorite blanket and we don't want to use it. It might be a little bit scratchy or irritating, and so we just don't like to think about it or deal with it. But we're also not using it, and we need to decide what to do with it because otherwise it's just taking up space, just like these negative emotions and heartache. So I'm not super into energy healing or anything like that. Y'all know I'm more into Western medicine, but I very much respect everyone else's beliefs. So we're going to talk about that a little bit too. I don't necessarily have to believe in it myself in order to present information to you guys. So a lot of folks who are very much into energies and spiritual healing think that you may have an energy block. and you just keep going in your mind over and over and turning these issues over in your mind, and you still don't have an answer as to what to do. You're overanalyzing and you're underanalyzing at the same time. You're kind of over-feeling about it, but you're not actually processing it. So it's not really true analysis. It's just kind of wallowing in that emotion. And I know wallowing tends to have a negative connotation, but I don't really mean it like that. It's just that you're kind of steeping in it in a way, and you're not really getting through any of it. So we want to make sure we figure out how to let go of these things in a healthy manner, because just repressing them isn't letting them go. It could make it even worse. But we also can't just process emotions logically. Emotions are often irrational, and that is okay. I say that somewhat ironically, because if you're anything like me, I have trouble with that. Again, I like to think my feelings instead of feeling my feelings. But them's the breaks, and that's something I have to work on with my personal shadow self. We're going to go on a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about letting go.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Before the break, we were talking about heartache and how that affects us in different ways, as well as the importance of maintaining our emotional space. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about why we experience this heartache as a function of not being able to let go, even when we logically know that it's time. So ultimately, your heart wants what it wants. It is something that you cannot logically think through or talk yourself out of. Love is irrational. It is an emotion just like any other. And it takes a lot of work to fundamentally change that without feeling as much pain as normal, and to recognize it sooner rather than later instead of holding on for way too long. So a lot of folks, if you believe in soulmates, you think that there's just going to be a happily ever after. You're just going to stumble across this person one day and everything is going to work out perfectly fine. Now, I'm not saying that soulmates aren't real, but I would say that they're probably rare. And even if you've already known this person for a long time, you have both had separate lives since then. You're not going to necessarily be the same people throughout time. Even if you're in a relationship together, people can grow simultaneously and parallel with each other, but still be really growing apart. We are all on different paths, and that's okay. You have different components of your past in your life, and so do they. And you can't expect for one person to hold the keys to all of the different parts of you. So in the long run, you may still be able to come back together with that person. Not now doesn't necessarily mean not ever, but sometimes it does, and you need to let go. Regardless, you have to let go. Maybe you do get back together in this lifetime, but you could still let the relationship run its course because you've gotten everything you need from it. Not all relationships are necessarily meant to last. So what we're looking for in relationships is some reciprocity. So you guys need to want the same things and be willing to give each other equal effort. They want to give you what you need and vice versa. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have a soulmate. It's just someone that you're compatible with and who's willing to build a new life with you. So in that regard, it's really important to let go, because if you keep hanging on to love that you've really lost and just not let go of, then it's going to prevent you from finding it again in the future. So our mind does not really tell the difference between what's going on in the present and what's going on in the past. And to some degree, it has a lot of trouble with the future as well when it comes to our emotions. So something that has hurt you 10 years ago or 20 years ago may hurt you just as much as thinking about how much something could possibly hurt in the future or how much something is hurting you right now. And that's okay. That's totally natural. You may hear a song that reminds you of someone or see a sight that you have shared with a person before, and it just triggers you emotionally, and you have that cascade of emotions. That's normal, but you might want to try to avoid triggering yourself in that manner. If listening to that type of music is reminding you of the person who recommended it to you, then maybe kind of step out of that. Don't listen to that for a while. I'm not saying suppress it by any means, but give yourself some emotional space so that it's not just repeating in your head constantly. Because remember, when you're doing that, it's not even over-analyzing because you're not processing. You're just over-feeling, and that really just tends to lead to wallowing and depression. So you need to be able to take some of that energy from that relationship and put it in either a neutral space or put it in a different space so that then you can move forward from there. If your space is totally occupied, just like we talked about in keeping that box or keeping that blanket that's itchy and scratchy and annoying and you hate it and it's your least favorite blanket, but you're keeping it for some reason in the linen closet, it's just taking up space, just like your emotions. So you need to go ahead and boot it out because someone else who's interested in you will be able to tell that you're not truly available. So to that end, is there a way to end your relationship and feel a bit better about it and not be totally sunken down into the doldrums? Maybe. I think for some people it could be possible, but remember, we don't want to view these emotions of sadness as being truly negative. No emotion is inherently negative, and they all have an evolutionary purpose. It is okay to feel sad about this. And I don't want you guys to get too fixated on the fact that you're not getting exactly what you're wanting as being a loss. So in that respect, it's very similar to the concept of the friend zone. The friend zone doesn't really exist unless you view friendship as being a consolation prize. So if you're looking at this as, I want a relationship with you or bust, oh, you're offering me friendship? Ew, I don't want that. That's like being first runner-up. I hate it. If you look at it that way, then you're always going to have a hard time because you're looking at it as a loss instead of just a different type of win. It's really a lot about your perspective in this manner. So a lot of folks have a really difficult time with that change, and they really burrow into that negative train of thought where they're viewing it as a loss instead of viewing it in a positive way. Instead, kind of think about, how could this be good for your life? Could this perhaps take you to a better place and obtain a better relationship? Were you truly getting everything you wanted out of that other relationship? I have a feeling that if you're this upset about it, you probably weren't. So a lot of folks get really caught up in what we think we want rather than what we actually want or what we need. That's also how people get trapped into trying to make themselves into a person to fit a mold for another person or to fit into a relationship. That's how people like Ann Perkins in Parks and Rec tend to lose themselves in relationships and take on traits and characteristics to the point that when the relationship ends, they don't really recognize themselves anymore. So it's important to be honest with not just your partner, but also yourself in what you truly want. I know I keep recommending you guys to do a shadow journal and a gratitude journal, but honestly, it's one of the best things that I've done for myself, and I'm recommending it because it works. And this is coming from a person who is highly pragmatic and is not very into emotions and talking about those. A lot of my personal shadow work is in the emotional wellness spectrum. So this has really helped me out a lot, and I totally recommend it for you guys. If you want to integrate that shadow with your ego, that means all of it, even and especially the parts that you may think are icky, like emotions are for me, or also the parts that are extra difficult to deal with. Those are the ones that are the most important to focus on. So don't just get caught up in thinking about what you want, because you might not actually want what you think you want. Journal it out, figure it out, and then go from there. If your physical desire is part of your highest self, then, that is what's right for you. If it's more of the emotional connection, then that's what's right for you. It just depends on who you are specifically and where your priorities lie. So getting down to the nitty-gritty of it, how do you get the right person to come into your life? Well, you can go out looking for it, and that's really important, especially if you're an introvert. Like myself, you can't just stay at home all the time and expect people to come to you. They're not going to break down your door and come and fall in love with you. You have to put yourself out there a little bit. And again, growth comes from a place of discomfort. So it's going to be a little uncomfortable. Take your girlfriends out with you or your guy friends to go and be your wingman for it. Have them introduce you to some friends perhaps and go from there. It's not dorky or anything to be set up with some of your friends. It's not the 90s. Doesn't have to be a blind date. You can meet them at a party or something and it can still be chill. So mostly though, what I recommend is that if you want your dream relationship, work on you. You need to work on your self-care. Become comfortable with yourself. You can go on all the dating sites that you want, but if you're not working on your past trauma and working on your shadow self, then you're just going to be bringing baggage from previous relationships right along into the next one. And that's not healthy for either person. You don't want to lay your shadow on that person any more than you would want someone else to lay theirs on you. So you have to really consider your thoughts and your feelings. Be mindful of them because those are cultivating your reality. You're going to get a lot more of what you want through loving yourself instead of beating yourself up about stuff. So think about it when you mess something up, the way that you talk to yourself. It's important to be kind and to understand that just like everyone else, you're able to make mistakes. Now, I recommend meditation in that regard for some folks. Again, it's mindfulness, but you can also do that through journaling if you're not into meditation, like me. All right, we're going to go on another quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the path of healing.
The GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about really detoxing our emotional spaces and making room for ourselves in our own lives in order to pursue better relationships with others. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what that may look like. So love is really complicated, you guys. It is a lot of highs and lows. It is really like a roller coaster. When I was talking to my friend Marie about that this morning, I've actually likened it to a roller coaster because you get really excited about the really great parts. And then sometimes a ride like that can just leave you feeling nauseous, especially if you carry a lot of your stress in your stomach. And like we discussed in the first segment, heartache can definitely impact your stomach. So in that way, we really want to cultivate relationships that bring us joy. We're going to KonMari method the heck out of that, you guys. Relationships may bring you hurt and heartbreak, so you can't just avoid things just because they may hurt you in the end. You are almost guaranteed to be hurt in relationships. And that fear can really prevent you from experiencing a lot of truly beautiful things in the world. Just like a fear of heights can prevent you from experiencing the beauty of the Grand Canyon or other great national monuments, or a fear of flying can prevent the same. We have to make sure that we're not letting fear rule our lives. But at the same time, working on our shadow selves can also improve our resilience. We want to be able to move forward in a healthy, positive way when we're hurt. Now, I do want you to be able to also sit there and feel the feelings. Put on a Don Bluth movie and see how you feel afterwards. Relish in the catharsis, but we also need to move forward after a little bit. Even Beyonce, when she has bad days, will give herself one day to go ahead and just truly grieve where she does nothing else. And then after she goes ahead and processes those emotions, she moves forward and gets everything done like the bad bee she is. That's what we're aiming for. So moving forward is really all up to you. No one else can move you forward. Now, I don't want to use cliches like you can't love somebody else until you love yourself, or no one's going to love you until you love yourself. That's not true. I know that for a fact because lots of my friends have loved me even when I could not love myself. And I've been able to love others even when I didn't like myself. So it's not necessarily entirely true in and of itself, that maxim. But again, I don't really believe in absolutes. So self-love is still important though. You need to have not only self-love, but self-compassion. Understand and accept who you are and what you've experienced, but also decide not to let that define you in its entirety. You can be whoever you want to be. You're a work in progress, and who you are now is not necessarily who you'll be 10 minutes from now or 2 years from now. That is up to you within the moment. So you're on these journeys both together and separately. And so it's really important to cultivate your own sense of self-love. Now, that's not just love, as we discussed, but also compassion. You need to speak to yourself and think of yourself and treat yourself with kindness and empathy. You are worthy and deserving of being in loving relationships with friends, with family, and with those you're seeking out romantic relationships with. Self-compassion can help you with the pain and hurt that you need to process in any relationship. And even long-term loving relationships can have bouts of pain and hurt within them. So cultivating self-compassion isn't something that we do just following a breakup, but it's more of a daily practice that's really important for our emotional, mental, and spiritual wellness as well. When you are working on this journey, think about what you would consider telling a friend if they were in the same situation. What would you want to say to them? I've told you guys before that sometimes Janine will tell me, stop talking about my friend like that if I say I'm being a bonehead or something. And that really helps me with that perspective. It's like, oh, I am saying something mean about somebody that she loves. And although it's partly a joke, there is also some seriousness to it. And it's really important how words really shape our realities. How we think and our language in general does make a strong impact on how we view the world around us. So it may seem like a small thing, but it can be a difficult habit to break because it's so deeply ingrained. But because it's so deeply ingrained, it's an important habit to break because it can change how you view yourself and others and the world around you. So if you don't necessarily want to do it for you, I hope that you do. But you may also do it in order to change how you view the world around you. You might be thinking that, if you were just kind to yourself all the time, you would stay in bed all day binging Netflix and playing video games or listening to music, eating snacks. And, that's partly fun. That is part of self-care some days, but you can't do that every day. That's very similar to how a lot of folks view homeschooling. When I was homeschooled, my friends would be like, oh man, I'm so jealous. You just get to chill all day and probably eat cookies and just stay in bed and watch TV. And I'm like, that's not the way that works. But I get where people are coming from with it. However, a little bit of that is self-care. You can stay in your pajamas and watch TV all day every now and then as a treat and call it self-care. But if you do it every day, that's depression, you guys. So that is going to be more of wallowing at that point or just letting yourself off the hook. And quitting things is a habit just like anything else. I have learned that one the hard way in my personal life. It's important that you don't give yourself permission to quit too many things because then you're able to go ahead and validate that for other areas of your life. So you really want to adjust your mindset. Remember, Viktor Frankl said that when we can no longer change our circumstances, it's important to change ourselves. He does refer to that as a challenge as well, and that's okay. Challenges do not have to be inherently negative. It just means it's something to be overcome. And sometimes having something to overcome can be exciting, like when you're graduating. That can be very exciting. Or when you're going out for a promotion at work. That is a new challenge, and it can be exciting as well as nerve-wracking. So we really want to remove a lot of self-judgment. Just like Robert Johnson and Carl Jung talked about with the shadow and the ego, it's important to remove a lot of the self-judgment when you are considering these things that are happening in your life. Not just in how you react to the world around you, but just also how you're feeling. How are you feeling in the moment when you are having a difficult breakup? It's totally okay to not be okay as long as you keep your mind focused on eventually moving forward. You can sit in the grief for a little bit. It's important to feel it, but then you have to move forward. And that will allow you to bring your best self into every realm that you are operating in, every context, work, family, school, and so on. It's also going to help you reframe any challenges that you are going to have in your life that you just cannot foresee or you cannot avoid. There are a ton of them in the human existence that are just inherent in being human, or they're inherent in our particular cultures, and you cannot just avoid them. Remember, we discussed in a previous episode that avoidance is not a healthy coping mechanism. It makes us feel okay for a little bit, but it can really damage our resilience in the long run. So we want to make sure we are going through life and trying to prepare ourselves for these challenges by removing self-judgment. Because sometimes stuff just happens in life. I want to believe in fairy tales as much as the next guy, but sometimes terrible things just happen, and you need to be able to get in that saddle and deal with it. Once you kind of realize, though, that everyone shares a ton of these common crappy experiences, it's going to also help you to have compassion when others are having those difficult times. If they're experiencing loss or frustration, tribulations, if they're failing at something, then it is easier to help others. And sometimes through helping others, we learn how to help ourselves. So we're going to go on another quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about living a self-compassionate life.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Journey towards healing following heartbreak. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about self-compassion and how to really emphasize that in our lives. Self-compassion is really going to begin with just accepting that you aren't perfect. Nobody is. And we tend to make a lot more room for others to not be perfect, but expect a lot from ourselves, particularly if you are type A like me. I cannot tell you guys how many times Roger has told me, hey, it's okay if it's not perfect. What matters is getting it done, because life is 95% just showing up. If you've seen the TV show New Girl, the episode with Jessica Biel where she and Zooey Deschanel's character are both going out for the same guy at a wedding. They're both trying to pick up the same guy. They're trying a method called Bidening, which is like Joe Biden, where you just hang around and hope that, you're going to be there no matter what happens when they turn around. And that kind of concept really cracks me up. It's a very funny episode and also topical with our current election happening as we speak. But in general, we just want to make sure that we are not taking that too far. You are allowed to be dealing with your hurt and your pain. You're not perfect, and that's okay. Part of it is just showing up and just being there, just getting it done. Sometimes good enough is good enough. Alex from last year would not be sitting here telling you that. She would be absolutely horrified to hear me saying that right now. But I have found recently that some of the interviews and stuff that I've conducted that I thought went really poorly were the ones that definitely hired me. My presentation may not have been perfect, but I asked the right questions and I was able to answer any questions that they had. And when I wasn't able to answer the questions, I offered to go and look it up. I even had a whiteboard fall down across my computer where I was having an at-home interview via the internet a couple weeks back, and it was pretty crazy looking, but they still hired me. So sometimes even when things feel like they're completely going awry and the type A inside of you is just crying and screaming, mascara going everywhere, I mean like full on ugly crying, you guys, sometimes things still work out. Just like how stuff can happen in a negative way, it can also happen in a positive way. You just have to be open to it and not beat yourself up about the mistakes you're making, particularly in the moment. If you can roll with the punches, then your interviewer or your boss or your partner is really going to see that, and it's going to be important in seeing how you deal with these issues. So you're worthy of love, you're worthy of respect, just the way that you are. So just like Mr. Rogers always used to say, I like you just the way you are. And self-compassion and living that in your lifestyle is really about embracing yourself just the way you are. If you feel worthy, it's going to really shape how you allow others to treat you and how you treat other people. We accept the love that we think we deserve, and that can be a very hard lesson to learn, especially if we have survived childhood trauma or other types of trauma as we have aged, particularly in interpersonal relationships. So when I say trauma, I don't just mean like physical abuse. I mean people who've been cheated on, people who have really been ghosted, or someone hasn't been totally forthright with you or put in as much effort as you have in these relationships. Remember, reciprocity is very important. So if you're allowing somebody to treat you in a manner that is not reciprocal with what you are willing and actively doing for them, then sometimes it's important to take a step back and to set those boundaries. Having boundaries is going to help you feel worthy, and it's going to let others know, hey, this is my boundary. You can't treat me like that. I won't treat you like that. And it can also help you reshape your life from a framework of kindness. There's also a lot of confidence that comes from feelings of self-worth. It's not necessarily feeling confident gives you self-worth. It's self-reinforcing. It's a positive feedback cycle, like we discussed the other day. It can really help you commit to relationships that make you feel good and let go of those that you don't, so that you don't end up staying in relationships long past their expiration or best by date just because you spent a long time making a mistake and you feel reluctant to let it go. So letting go is a very important component of your self-compassion. Don't punish yourself for your mistakes. Mistakes happen. That is okay. Learning from them is what's important. You need to learn from it, and you need to learn how to forgive yourself. It's not just an I'm sorry, but it means growing. So learning from your mistakes can be uncomfortable. Remember, growth generally comes from a place of discomfort, and that's okay. You're learning from it, you're going to grow from it, and then you're going to let it go. You're going to let go of what spurred on the growth and just take the growth with you into the future. You don't want all of that baggage or that scratchy blanket just chilling in there. Just because your great Aunt Linda gave it to you does not mean that you have to keep it. You might not even like great Aunt Linda. You don't need to hang on to that. That's okay. Even if you loved her, you're not using it. You don't have to hang on to it through a sense of guilt or blame or judgment any more than you would those emotions. So learning and growing from forgiveness can mean repairing a relationship sometimes, but not always. Forgiveness is for you. It's not for the other person. You don't have to let that person back into your life. Sometimes you can, if that's your goal, but oftentimes it just means moving on to a different path. I think that believing that you have to let someone back into your life if you forgive them stops a lot of people from forgiving. And that stopped me for a very long time with certain people in my life. But it's very important to understand it's for you. It's not for them. It just means you're not carrying that baggage around anymore. And when you think of them, you're not letting it hurt you anymore. But you can also look forward and continue on with your life. I know I preach about mindfulness a lot in here, you guys, but it is an integral component of self-compassion. It is where you are just letting these emotions pass through you and you recognize them as they are. And that is okay. We don't have to judge or label them. If you're worried about failure, like I often am, then, you go, what if I fail at this new job? I don't want to tell anyone about the interview that I had because if I fail at it, then everybody's going to know I failed. Or, I am so embarrassed about my recent divorce because I don't know what to tell my friends. I don't know what to tell my family. They're going to have so many questions and I don't know how to deal with all of it. And I'm going to be embarrassed. Instead, think of it like the Ariana Grande lyrics. Thank you, next. It's about the KonMari method. A mindful thought is more similar to this relationship or this interview has taught me a lot. It's helped me grow, and it's also shown me where I have more growing to do on my own before I am truly ready for settling down in a relationship or finding that final job in that city I really want to live in. So it's not right or wrong. It's just exploring your thoughts from a different perspective. An alternative perspective can really reframe and reshape our lives. Mindfulness is integral to that and helping you to see the forest and the trees. So how do we put self-compassion into practice? It's about offering yourself kindness when you need it most. You listen to your needs without judgment, and you go ahead and forgive yourself because you're not perfect. You're only human, just like everyone else. You need to offer yourself kindness, not just when it's easiest, but when it is the most difficult. Just like how when we talked about chiropractors, and my chiropractor told me that whenever people are in pain, they are likely to follow their stretching regimen, but it's a lot harder to get people to do it when they feel fine. You need to make sure you're practicing it all the time, especially when you need it most, but also all the time because it is self-reinforcing. You just want to try to learn from your mistakes, journal it out if you need to, and try to do better next time. But also just recognize that you're doing your best. Sometimes that really is enough. You need to just keep improving. And you can do that while still recognizing the growth that you're experiencing along the way. That's mindfulness. All right, we're going to go on another break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about a couple of ways to release heartbreak.
GSMC Beauty Tips Podcast gives you advice on everything from hair to fashion to skincare products. We'll talk about the latest trends in makeup, hairstyles, and anti-aging remedies. And we'll cover all of the newest fashion trends. If you have an interest in or questions about the beauty trends that might work best for you, the Golden State Media Concepts Beauty Tips Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Beauty Tips Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were discussing how to put self-compassion into practice to live a self-compassionate life. Now we're going to talk a little bit about some ways to release or relieve grief and heartbreak. So we discussed broken heart syndrome a little bit earlier and how it can damage the heart. Its medical name is stress cardiomyopathy, and it can be caused by any type of stress, including extreme anxiety, fear, or even surprise. And sometimes those are coupled together. If you suddenly lose your job, I guarantee you're going to have all three of those. It's important to recognize that grief is a natural process and that we need to process through our grief and our emotions in order to come out on the other side healthier. When you do have broken heart syndrome, it makes your adrenal glands send a surge of stress hormones to your heart, and that's pretty much just paralyzing it and shutting it down. That's why it's changing the shape of it a little bit. But it's not the same as a heart attack because heart attacks are caused by blockages in like your arteries. So a lot of folks who are dealing with broken heart syndrome don't have any recurring damage. They recover and they're fine. But in some cases that are very severe, it can cause heart failure as well. Broken heart syndrome also most often occurs in women over the age of 55 years, and researchers suspect that low estrogen can be a factor in that. There are a couple of different natural pain relief strategies for both emotional pain and heartache. So physical and emotional pain are both processed by the same area of the brain, which we discussed in earlier segments. And some of those pain relief remedies might offer relief for one and or both. They performed a study a while back in which subjects experienced social rejection, and they gave them the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug acetaminophen every day for 3 weeks. They reported having fewer hurt feelings at the end of that time period than people who received the placebo. They also did some brain scans on them and found less activation in the parts of the brain that process pain. Now, I'm not encouraging you guys to take pain relievers long-term. Taking NSAIDs in particular long-term can cause some very difficult problems medically in general, and that includes over-the-counter or pharmaceuticals. So that is not a great option. And it's also not going to help you process those emotional issues that are the underlying cause. However, there are a few natural options that you can use to soften the blow of some emotional pain on your physical body while you are processing those emotions. In order to reduce inflammation, then you may want to try to keep your blood sugar stable. You can do that and keep your inflammation low with a lot of vegetables and some high quality protein and fat. Remember that serotonin is made in the gut, and so it's important to eat foods with fiber in order to produce more of that serotonin. It's also going to help keep your blood sugar stable by making sure it's slowing down your digestive process so you can really utilize fructose in addition to glucose, which is what your body naturally wants for its blood sugar. You can also try some natural pain and stress relief like emulsified resveratrol or curcumin, getting plenty of vitamin D. But remember, with vitamin D, 90% of it is made by our bodies with the intervention of the sun. Only 10% really tends to be usable in being derived from our diet. So go outside for a little bit. Go for a walk if you have heartache right now. It might sound really weird, but it can help you in the long run. If you get good quality fish oil and like some omega-3 fatty acids, that can be good for you too. So eat some asparagus along with some salmon for dinner and maybe some lentils or some quinoa or something. So you're getting good fibers and you're also getting those fatty acids and everything else that you need, fiber and whatnot, to really give your body the best chance it has at making those feel-good hormones and neurotransmitters for you. A lot of folks also use white willow bark. Now, I've not used that in particular, but some folks recommend it for pain relief. So if natural medicine is your thing, maybe give that a try. But remember, I am not a doctor, and I always recommend running any of these herbal compounds by your general practitioner prior to using them, especially if you're using other herbal supplements or types of Western medication, because those can interfere with each other. I also want you to be extra gentle with your body. Your body thinks that you're wounded. Remember, your body can't tell the difference in stress between a physical threat or an emotional stress response. It just knows that you're hurt. So you need to heal and recover. If you're like me, you may feel very tempted to throw yourself into extra work. I'm a workaholic and a half, you guys. I never feel like I'm doing enough, even when I feel great. But when I am trying to bury my emotions instead of processing them, I will work crazy overtime. And I recognize now, as I'm working on being a kinder, gentler Alex, that that's not healthy for me. I'm not processing it, and it's just avoidance behavior, which, again, is not a great coping mechanism. Drinking a lot is not going to be very helpful either, but conversely, you don't want to over-exercise either. Anorexia athletica is a very real problem, and doing too much exercise can really be taxing on your body as well. You also don't want to engage in any other forms of avoidance activities that are just going to put off dealing with your suffering, because that's what's really happening. Remember, that blanket is still taking up space in the linen closet if you're not actively dealing with what's going on. Put on the Marie Kondo show and KonMari method out your emotions, you guys. The only way out is through, is really what we're coming down to. So we are looking at a holistic perspective for this, and grief and heartache can be approached holistically, just like anything else in this health and wellness podcast. There are also a few other ways to release heartbreak, and one of those is just to go ahead and honor your feelings. You guys know I'm a huge fan of Don Bluth movies and how he allows children to sit in grief and learn how to deal with that. If you're not very comfortable with that process, Don Bluth movies are a very gentle way to cultivate those skills. If you are sad, grieve. And I don't just mean when someone dies or someone's going to die. You can grieve the loss of a relationship as well. The end of a friendship, if those end. It's okay to grieve in general. If you get angry about it, go ahead and talk to someone about it. But keeping it to yourself is self-destructive, just as avoidance is. That pain you feel belongs to you. It is still yours. It is in whatever box or closet you've shoved it in. But it's like Monica's closet in Friends, where she has that crazy hoarder closet. The rest of her house is clean and it looks great to everyone else, but she has shoved all of these demons she's repressed into this closet. They're still there, even if you can't see it, and they will pop back out when you least expect it. As Maya Angelou said, there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside of you. If you aren't comfortable talking to a friend about it just yet, then maybe write a letter. You can write a letter to the person who you feel has hurt you, and you don't have to address it specifically to them. You can just journal about it. You're writing it down so that you get all the feelings down on paper so it's no longer inside of you, threatening you and causing those stress responses. Now, I don't recommend mailing that letter. It is just supposed to be for you. Some of my friends are very into burning it to release it back out into the universe. So they're getting it out of themselves and then they are setting it on fire in a very safe manner. Remember, don't start fires. Smokey the Bear will be very upset. But you can go ahead and safely do that. And if you are underage and listening to this right now, make sure you do it with the help of an adult. Just saying, you guys. But you can have like a ceremonial fire. You can have your best friend there to support you, or somebody who's really close to you in your life. You guys could even do it together. You don't have to read each other's letters. Those can be super private, and that's fine. But you can go ahead and release that pain symbolically. And sometimes symbolism can be extra helpful for us. Once you've already felt the feelings and you've tried to release it, start trying to move on. That's okay. You can talk to somebody now who can hear your story. So someone you feel has a right to it, one of your best friends, or, whether that's somebody in real life or if that's an online friend. Sometimes online friends can be easier to talk to, and I totally understand that. I have people like that in my life. You just need to make sure that these people are going to keep your story to themselves and help you move forward with compassion. Go ahead and take a little bit of time if you need to as well. You don't have to rush getting back out there, but you also don't want to necessarily hold back. I'm a big fan of hermiting, but hermiting because of heartbreak is not healthy. It's different to be comfortable being alone, like we talked about in our loneliness episode, versus feeling subjective loneliness where you are really feeling it. So healing from a heartbreak takes a lot of time, but don't go full Obi-Wan Kenobi at this point. We want to make sure we're still moving forward. And you'll know when it's time. You'll know when you're ready to really have this conversation with people. So trust that and wait until you're ready, and then go ahead and release it so you can see and be seen. Lastly, try not to let your grief or sadness define you. It may overwhelm you at times, and that is okay. But there is more to you than just your broken heart. That is one part of you. Think about who you were before that happened, and remember how great you felt. Write yourself letters for later, for now. You write yourself letters when you're feeling great, so you can remind yourself later, hey, it does get better. You just survived this heartbreak, and it will get better. It is okay to not be okay, but it's also important to remind yourself that you will be okay again. Try not to do any self-imposed pity parties. You don't want to wallow per se, but really think about what you actually need. Ask yourself that. It's not about what you think you want, but it's about what you really need. Sometimes reaching out to a close friend is definitely what we need, even though that is not necessarily what we want to do, because being vulnerable is very vulnerable. It's very upsetting sometimes, and it's very difficult. And you're having to deal with embarrassment and shame and guilt at that point. But that's okay, because other people are vulnerable too, and sharing that with them can also show them that they can share things with you. Lastly, just remember that this too shall pass. Nothing is permanent. If you're really into meditation, then think about that, about the impermanence of everything. It's one of the tenets of meditation in many ways. That's why we're just mindfully letting these emotions pass through us and accepting them as they are. But also, from a pragmatic perspective, literally nothing can really last forever. And it will be over at some point. You will be able to make it through. Just hang on, practice self-compassion, and move forward. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Health and Wellness Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show, and writing a nice review always really helps us. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, I'd appreciate it. Thank you kindly, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Health and Wellness Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.